Hey there, welcome to Silversmithing 202. Today I'm going to be going over some basic jewelry terminology. I want to make sure that we're conversing apples to apples. And I also know that knowing the proper terms to use when you're talking about different parts of a ring and gemstones and jewelry making in general is going to help you not only to relay what you're speaking about to your customers and clients, but also to help you find what you're looking for in catalogs when you're helping to find things, and just in general sound like you know what you're talking about. So I'm going to be going through a variety of different things here. And if you're new to this series, my name is Austin Moore. I've been making jewelry for about 15 years. And I've been putting together these classes, starting with the basic fundamentals of jewelry making. If you want to start from the very beginning, if you're new to jewelry making, here is a link to the very first class in the 100 series, which has 13 classes it goes through. This is the 200 series, and this is the second class in that series. And we're going to be covering a few more advanced topics in this series. So without further ado, let's get on to some basic jewelry terminology. All right, so let's get right into this. The first thing I want to cover is the anatomy of a ring. So a ring is obviously anything that somebody's going to be putting on their finger. And from that, we can go break it down a little further and say there are also bands. A band is simply a ring that does not have a top or a bottom to it. It tends to be symmetrical all the way around. You can rotate it. So men's wedding band is a classic example of that. There are, of course, ladies' wedding bands. They can have gemstones in them, but they don't necessarily have to. But generally, they're uniform in shape all the way around. So a ring oftentimes is going to have a top and a bottom. The round part at the bottom, extending up to the top, is called the shank. And the portion at the top holding the stone, or the main stone holding arrangement, is going to be called the head, also called a setting. And this is generally made up of either a prong, bezel, or other bits of metal holding the stone in place. So there's a lot of variations, and you can get really creative with this, but I want to kind of cover the basics. So here's a picture of a classic ring shank here. You can see it's going up here, and near the top here, the sides cross and then go up and hold the stone. It's kind of like a small trellis design. And this is called a trellis design. You see the two parts where it's angling up here at the sides. When a ring has elevated shoulders like that are going up towards the stone, that is called a cathedral shank. And the reason for this is because it resembles the flying buttresses that would have been on the sides of a cathedral in, I guess this would be Gothic architecture of the 1400s and on forward. So, and this is still commonly used today. So that's a cathedral ring. You do not have to have these cathedral buttresses on the sides. You can just have a simple ring shank with a head on top, and it's just at that point called a ring. So at the bottom here, there's other things you can do. If the bottom part is what we would call a squircle or a rounded square, that's called a euro shank. Now, a euro shank is used on the finger to help balance the weight of the ring, and also those little square ends, those corners, will help keep the ring shank from rotating on the finger. So going back to that trellis design, here's another example of what I would consider to be a full trellis ring. And you see the lattice work. Lattice is also another term used here, extending underneath the stone. This is also a great example of a triple stone ring. It's got three main stones. Triple stone rings can also have more stones around on the side of the band, but there are always three primary stones. Generally, there's one larger and two of equal size on the sides, but they can be all the same size. The center stone can also be a different shape than the side stones, but this is what comprises a three-stone ring. So going back to bands real quick here, I want to give you this example. This is what is called a flush mount or flush set gemstones into a band. This is just a really simple example of a few stones dotted throughout the ring, but anytime that a diamond or gemstone is set down into the metal so that the crown or top facet of the stone is roughly even with the metal surrounding it, this is called a flush setting. All right, the next few examples here are a couple of what I would call mixed metal rings. These are rings, and it need not be a ring, it could be a pendant earring, really any type of jewelry, but that uses more than one type of metal. And I do want to point out that if you're making fine jewelry for consumers and you want it to last a long time, which is going to go hand in hand with having a good reputation, do not use plating to achieve different colored results. It'll just wear off over time, and replating just small portions of the ring can be a real pain in the butt, especially. Okay, that brings me to the next topic I want to talk about, and that's the type of jewelry manufacturing. There are really two types, but there's a third that I want to cover briefly. The first most popular jewelry making technique would be casting, also known as lost wax casting. And this is pretty simple. You're probably already familiar with it. A master is carved out of wax or resin or even bone or other organic materials. It is then put into a flask where it is surrounded by material similar to plaster of Paris. This is called investment, and it's actually a little different because it's porous. And the reason why it's porous is that when you pour the molten metal into the flask, that metal will airlock if it doesn't have any way to push the air that is in the mold out. So that air needs to be able to escape out through the investment material, which is why it's porous at a very small level, like microscopic level. These castings are generally done with the metal being pushed in under pressure, either through a centripetal force or through a vacuum, which is actually attached to the bottom of the flask and then sucks both the air out as well as the metal in. Afterwards, of course, the metal is removed from the flask, cleaned, and removed from the flask casting tree. And then you go ahead and you're going to clean up the casting, finish it, add any stone, etc. So the second most popular type of jewelry making, and the one that I actually teach in my classes, is called fabrication. So in fabrication, what you're doing is you're taking bits and pieces of things and combining them together in order to make jewelry. So this can take a lot of different forms. You might be using some components that were cast and then soldering them onto a ring shank that you forged, and then filing it and hammering it into the shape you want. You might add a few other little pieces here and there until finally you have your finished piece. But regardless, what you're doing is you're typically taking multiple pieces, combining them together, using soldering or cold connections, that's also a possibility, and that's your finished piece. So the third one that I said I wanted to cover, which is really not used in jewelry as much, it would be called forging. And the reason for that is that if you are a blacksmith or a knife maker or somebody who works with steel and you create your pieces by taking your steel, heating it up in a forge or oven or furnace or whatever you use, and then hammering it into the various shapes that you want, but not actually connecting multiple pieces together, that's called forging. So that's why jewelry typically is not forged, not in whole anyways. You might have some components of your jewelry that you could have forged, although you're probably cold forging it because jewelry typically does not need to be red hot in order to bend metal. For example, if you bend a ring shank around a mandrel by hammering on it, or if you add a hammer texture to something, or if you hammer an ear wire to flatten it, that is forging. But it would be improper in general to say that you are selling forged jewelry. The next subject I want to cover will help you when you're looking for things in catalogs to buy as supplies, because the truth of it is very few jewelers actually hand make every last little component like jump rings or heads. It is much more economical and a huge time saver if the thing you need is already being made by a quality manufacturer. You can buy it and then add it to your jewelry. So there's two main categories of things that you're going to use. The first one is findings and the second one is mountings. So a mounting is generally a piece of jewelry that is done except for the gemstones. A subcategory of a mounting is called a semi-mount. A semi-mount will have all of the accent gemstones, generally sold with diamond accents. They're already set, but it will not have the center stone set yet. So semi-mounts are something that jewelry stores like to carry. It's not really something that a jeweler per se or a jewelry maker is going to use a lot of, because you're really not making jewelry. You'll see these sold online by a lot of people who might claim to be artists, but really they're just buying a semi-mount and adding a gemstone into it, but they really had no role in actually making the jewelry. The other thing is findings. Now, findings are something which are fantastic for jewelers as a resource, because they're small little components that you will need in order to make jewelry, but they are by no means a finished piece of jewelry on their own. A couple more things to cover. I want to keep this video relatively brief, just covering the basics. This next thing is one that is more commonly confused among customers than it is among jewelers, but if you are new to the jewelry, you will want to get this right. These are carats. C-A-R-R-O-T-S, carats, and we eat those. They're very tasty. I like them a lot. A carat used in relation to a gemstone is describing its weight. A 1 carat diamond, spelled with a C, is a description of the weight of the diamond. The third carat is carat with a K, K-A-R-A-T, and it is a reference to the purity of the metal that you are working with. That is why when you see metal, it is stamped with, we're talking gold here, 10K or 14K or 18K or 22K, or finally 24K, K standing for carat. So if you have, for example, 18 karat gold, that is 18 parts pure gold. This would be like the actual element gold out of total of 24 parts. So that would be 75% pure gold. So this is why sometimes it's important to clarify. When a customer asks for a pure gold ring, you might want to ask them, are you sure you want a 24 karat gold that's going to be really soft? And they might not realize, oh, well, what I meant was I want a gold ring that's not plated. I just want a gold ring. And you're like, okay, you probably want 14 karat, or if you're in Europe, they're probably asking for 18 karat, which is more popular over the pond. Here in the US, 14 karat is much more popular. So you might say, oh, might I suggest 14 karat gold? This is going to be solid gold without any plating, and then you can explain the purity system and so on and so forth. So that's really important to know. You simply take the carat, so 10 karat, divide it by 24, because 24 parts possible, and that gives you the percentage of gold in the piece. Higher the carat, the higher the gold percentage. Only a couple more things I want to go over here, and the next one is gemstones. And since you're a jeweler, you're going to be working with gemstones, it's nice to be able to understand the different types of shapes and cuts and so on and so forth. So the first one is simple. It's probably the first stone you worked with, especially if you took my 100 series class. That's a cabochon. Cabochon is pretty simple. It basically has two sides, a flat bottom and a domed top. That's it. So if it has facets on the top, it's actually not a cabochon, it's a rose cut. And a rose cut is basically a flat-bottomed stone, and imagine a cabochon which has been faceted on the top, similar to a geodesic dome, also called a bucky dome. Moving on, the third type of stone commonly used in jewelry is a faceted stone. And among faceted stones, there are a host of different cuts. There are a lot of designer cuts out there which don't fit into any of the normal shapes, but the normal shapes are going to be round, square, pear, marquee, oval, heart, baguette, and cushion. There's a few variations in there as well, but those are the basic shapes of gemstones. So if you're designing a piece, it's handy to know what you're going to be working with ahead of time and what size. Last two things concerning gemstones. There are two most common types of cuts for almost all gemstones. The first one is called a step cut, and it's called this because every single facet goes around the stone in a line, and then it steps down to a steeper angle at the bottom and at the top for another row of facets. So typically every single facet is going to be in the shape of like a rectangle or a trapezoid, depending on the stone, but it's going to have usually 4 sides. So the other type that is most common would be called a brilliant cut, and brilliant cuts are most commonly used in round cut diamonds, but there are the brilliant cut is modified for use in squares and ovals, and even in cushions, etc. The characteristic of a brilliant cut is that it is typically made up of diamonds and triangles for the facets. So that's the big giveaway there for the. Okay, that's all I got for today. Last parting little bit of wisdom. Remember, peridot, the T is silent. It's not peridot, it's peridot. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. We're going to be having more videos here in the 200 series coming right up. And if you like what you see, go ahead and subscribe. If you want to leave me a comment, if you have questions about what I've just talked about, or if you have a request for future videos, go ahead. I do read the comments and I try to get back to every single one. Again, this is Austin. Thanks for watching.